A baby deer froze when the wolves surrounded him. But their leader did something unreal. Death seemed certain until the pack leader stepped forward and defied everything we know about nature's law. What happened next wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. This is the story that wildlife experts still can't explain to this day. Deep in the unforgiving wilderness, a newborn fawn trembled alone against the bitter cold. Its mother, gone, taken by hunters just hours after giving birth. The tiny creature, barely a day old, stood on wobbly legs that threatened to collapse with each hesitant step. Its delicate hooves sank slightly into the frozen ground, leaving behind perfect imprints, evidence of its desperate journey that would soon be covered by the gently falling snow. Winter had come early that year. Frost covered the forest floor, and food was scarce for even the most experienced survivors. The ancient oaks and pines stood like silent sentinels, offering no comfort to the lost little one who wandered beneath their towering branches. For this fragile fawn, with its spotted coat still damp from birth, survival seemed impossible. Nature had dealt it the cruelest hand imaginable. Each labored breath created small clouds in the frigid air as the fawn desperately searched for shelter, for warmth, for anything that might keep death at bay for just a few more hours. Its large, innocent eyes reflected a world too harsh for something so pure. The fawn's ears twitched at every sound, the crack of a distant branch, the whisper of wind through the trees, the ominous silence that sometimes fell without warning. Hunger gnawed at its empty stomach. Thirst parched its throat. Yet some primal instinct drove the fawn forward, one painful step after another. Its heartbeat, rapid and frightened, echoed in its own ears as it navigated the treacherous landscape. The dappled pattern on its back, designed by nature to camouflage it from predators, seemed a cruel joke now, as there was nowhere to hide in the barren winter forest. As dusk approached, shadows lengthened across the forest floor like reaching fingers. The temperature dropped further, and the fawn's shivers intensified. It had survived its first day alone, but night brought new dangers, unseen threats that lurked in the darkness. But the fawn had no idea that deadly eyes were already watching its every move. The alpha wolf sensed the fawn before he saw it. The scent of newborn prey carried on the wind, unmistakable, irresistible. His pack had gone 3 days without a substantial meal, and winter's grip tightened with each passing hour. Survival demanded action. The harsh landscape had offered little sustenance lately. Even the smaller rodents had gone into deep hibernation, and the few remaining birds had flown south weeks ago, leaving the forest eerily silent except for the occasional whisper of wind through bare branches. With a low, barely audible growl, he signaled to his pack. 7 pairs of yellow eyes gleamed in the fading light as they acknowledged his command. They moved like shadows through the trees, their paws making almost no sound against the frozen ground. Years of hunting together had perfected their deadly coordination. Each wolf knew its role without question, a living, breathing machine designed by nature for one purpose: efficient killing. The beta female flanked left, while 2 younger males circled right. Her silver-flecked coat blended perfectly with the patches of snow and shadow. She had been with the alpha longest, surviving 5 brutal winters by his side. The younger males, brothers from the same litter, had proven themselves last season when they helped bring down a massive elk that had fed the pack for a week. The remaining wolves spread out in a practiced formation that had brought down prey much larger and more dangerous than this helpless fawn. Their breath came in controlled pants, muscles tensed beneath thick winter coats, matted with ice and dirt from weeks of hard travel. These weren't ordinary wolves. This pack had survived 3 brutal winters in territory that had killed off 2 other packs. They were leaner, smarter, and more ruthless than most. Each carried scars from battles with rival predators and desperate prey. The alpha himself had lost part of an ear to a wolverine and bore a long scar down his muzzle from a buck's antler. The oldest female was missing 2 toes on her left hind foot, lost to frostbite during the worst blizzard anyone could remember. Even the youngest member, barely 2 years old, had a notched ear and a limp that became more pronounced in cold weather, the result of a desperate fight with a lynx over a rabbit. As they closed in on the fawn, the wolves communicated silently through subtle ear movements and tail positions. The pack tightened the circle methodically, cutting off every possible escape route. The hunt was almost too easy, almost beneath them. But hunger erased pride. Food was food, and the weak must fall so the strong could survive. That was the law of the wilderness, unchanging and merciless. The alpha had enforced this law countless times, teaching younger pack members that hesitation meant starvation. The fawn sensed danger too late. It froze mid-step, its wide eyes reflecting the approaching death from all sides. Its tiny body trembled uncontrollably as instinct told it what experience could not. These were killers, and it was surrounded. Its nostrils flared, taking in the musky scent of predator. Its ears swiveled frantically, catching the soft padding of paws on frozen ground. For a moment, it considered running, the desperate flight response hardwired into its DNA. But something deeper told it that movement now would only trigger the final attack. The alpha stepped forward, his massive paws crunching on the frost-covered ground. Steam rose from his muzzle with each exhale, creating a momentary fog around his scarred face. His yellow eyes locked with the terrified gaze of the fawn. In that moment, predator and prey connected in the ancient dance of life and death that had played out countless times in these woods. The other wolves paused, waiting for their leader's signal to close in for the kill. Muscles tensed, saliva dripped from hungry jaws. The scent of fear emanating from the fawn was intoxicating to predators who could detect a single drop of blood from a mile away. But then, something changed in the wolf's eyes. Something impossible. A flicker of, could it be recognition? Hesitation. The alpha's posture shifted slightly. The younger wolves sensed the change immediately, their own bodies responding to the subtle cues from their leader. The beta female tilted her head in confusion, a low whine escaping her throat. This wasn't how hunts were supposed to end. This wasn't the law of survival they all knew. Something ancient stirred in the alpha's memory. Perhaps it was the fawn's eyes. Too innocent, too trusting despite its fear. Perhaps it was the way it stood, trembling yet defiant, facing death with the quiet dignity that sometimes touched even the most hardened predators. Or perhaps it was something deeper, something the wolf himself could not understand. Memories from his own cubhood flickered through his mind. Fragments of warmth, protection, and belonging that predated his rise to leadership. The alpha took another step forward, but not to attack. He lowered his massive head and sniffed the fawn thoroughly, circling it with deliberate movements. His keen nose detected the lingering scent of the fawn's mother, now gone, and something else. A familiar undertone that triggered something protective in his primitive brain. The pack watched in confusion, some whining softly at this break from tradition. The youngest members shifted restlessly, their hunger making them impatient with this unexpected delay. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but loyalty to their leader held them in check. They had survived this long by trusting his judgment. even when it defied understanding. After what seemed an eternity, the alpha made a sound unlike anything the pack had heard before. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine, but something between. The vocalization resonated through the clearing, silencing even the distant birds. He gently nudged the fawn with his muzzle, pushing it toward the center of the pack. His movements were surprisingly gentle for a creature that could crush bone with a single bite. The message was clear and shocking. This fawn was now under his protection. The decision had been made, and in the rigid hierarchy of the pack, none would dare challenge it openly. The beta female approached cautiously, her eyes questioning. She had been the alpha's companion through countless hunts, through blizzards that had nearly killed them both, through territorial battles that had left them bloodied but victorious. Her trust in him was absolute. But this defied everything she knew about survival. She sniffed the fawn and looked to her mate for explanation, her tail slightly lowered in submission, but her posture still conveying confusion. None came. The alpha simply stood guard, his body language daring any pack member to challenge his decision. His hackles rose slightly when one of the younger males ventured too close to the fawn, a warning that required no vocalization. None did challenge him, though hunger rumbled in their empty stomachs and the scent of potential food stood tantalizingly before them. As darkness fell completely, the wolves formed a protective circle around the fawn. Their body heat created a warm pocket in the bitter cold night. The temperature dropped precipitously, as it often did in these mountains, and frost began to form on the exposed fur of the outermost wolves. They shifted positions occasionally, allowing each member to benefit from the warmth of the center. The fawn, exhausted and confused by this turn of events, eventually collapsed against the alpha's side, its tiny heart still racing, but its body surrendering to desperately needed sleep. Its breathing gradually slowed, and occasionally it would twitch in dreams, perhaps reliving its mother's final moments, or perhaps simply processing the dramatic reversal of its fortune. Throughout that long night, predators approached and retreated, sensing the wolf pack but confused by the scent of prey mingled with their own. A mountain lion screamed in the distance, the sound echoing off the rocky outcroppings that bordered the eastern edge of the forest. Owls hooted from skeletal trees, their silent flights occasionally visible against the star-filled sky as they hunted for smaller prey. A fox ventured close enough to catch the unusual scent, then quickly disappeared into the underbrush, its curiosity overwhelmed by prudence. But none dared approach the unusual family huddled together in the snow. The reputation of this particular pack extended beyond their immediate territory. They were known to be efficient and merciless when challenged. The night was not without its tensions. Twice the alpha had to reassert his authority when younger pack members grew restless, their hunger overriding their obedience. A low growl, a flash of teeth, a subtle shift in posture. The language of dominance needed no translation. By the deepest part of night, when the moon cast blue shadows across the snow, acceptance had settled over the group. Whatever the alpha's reasons, his decision would be honored. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light stretching across the forest. The first rays illuminated ice crystals hanging from bare branches, transforming the woodland into a glittering cathedral of frost. The fawn awoke, startled to find itself surrounded by what should have been its killers. Its first instinct was to bolt, but its muscles were stiff from cold and inactivity. Yet somehow, it sensed no danger from them now. Something had fundamentally changed in the relationship. A truce had been declared without words, an understanding reached without language. The alpha rose and stretched, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his thick winter coat. He shook himself vigorously, dislodging the accumulated snow and frost from his fur. Then began leading the pack deeper into the forest, toward a sheltered valley where hunting might be more productive. He looked back once, waiting. His gaze held neither threat nor particular warmth, simply expectation. After a moment's hesitation, the fawn followed on still wobbly legs. Its first steps were uncertain, muscles protesting after the long night, but it quickly found its rhythm. The other wolves fell into formation around it, creating a living barrier between the fragile creature and the dangers of the forest. What happened in the wolf's mind that night would remain a mystery. One of those inexplicable moments when nature defies its own rules. Perhaps he recognized something of himself in the orphaned creature, some echo of vulnerability that resonated with his own past struggles. Perhaps some long-dormant instinct awakened at the scent of a baby so recently born, triggering protective urges that transcended the boundaries between predator and prey. Or perhaps, in a world of rigid laws and harsh consequences, even the wilderness occasionally makes room for mercy. Nature, for all its brutality, sometimes surprises with moments of inexplicable grace. The pack moved through the trees as one unit, 7 wolves and a fawn, an impossible family forging an impossible path forward. Their paw prints in the snow told a story that no naturalist would believe. Predator and prey, moving in concert rather than in chase. The fawn stumbled occasionally on hidden obstacles beneath the snow, but always there was a wolf nearby, steadying it with a gentle nudge or simply waiting for it to regain its footing. But the winter was still young. Food was still scarce, and not all predators would be so forgiving of this breach in the natural order. In the distance, drawn by the unusual scent trail, other eyes watched and waited. Hunger recognized no sentiment, and the laws of survival rarely bent twice in the same season. 3 days had passed since the alpha's inexplicable decision. The pack moved steadily eastward, following ancient migration routes toward lower elevations where game might be more plentiful. Each paw print left behind told the story of their unusual journey. 7 sets of predator tracks alongside the delicate imprints of prey. The fawn had integrated into their formation with surprising ease, keeping pace despite its youth. Its initial terror had given way to a tentative trust, its survival instincts recalibrating to accept these predators as protectors rather than threats. When it tired, the alpha would slow the group's progress, allowing the small creature to rest before continuing their journey. These pauses became routine, accepted by the pack without the restlessness that would normally accompany such delays. The beta female had taken to walking alongside the fawn, occasionally nudging it away from dangerous terrain or guiding it toward easier paths. Her initial confusion had given way to a reluctant acceptance, then a curious sort of protectiveness. She would position herself between the fawn and any potential danger, her ears constantly swiveling to monitor their surroundings. Perhaps it was the absence of her own cubs, lost to a harsh spring flood the previous year, that awakened maternal instincts long suppressed by survival's demands. Whatever the cause, the bond between them strengthened with each passing day, evident in the way they moved in unconscious synchronization. Food remained scarce. The wolves had managed to bring down an aging hare and 2 squirrels, barely enough to sustain one member, let alone the entire pack. The hunt for these meager prizes had been challenging. Prey seemed to vanish at their approach, as if the entire forest conspired against them. They shared these meager findings, the alpha ensuring each wolf received something, though none received enough. He ate last, taking only what remained after the others had fed, the burden of leadership manifesting in self-sacrifice. The fawn fed on winter bark and the occasional patch of moss exposed by wind-swept clearings in the snow. Its ribs were becoming visible beneath its dull brown coat, and its once bright eyes had developed a glazed quality that spoke of prolonged hunger. Hunger sharpened tempers. Twice, younger wolves had snapped at each other over scraps, requiring the alpha's intervention. His growl was enough to separate them, but the tension lingered, palpable in the air between pack members who had once moved in perfect harmony. The unspoken question hung in the air with each passing day. How long could they continue to protect a creature they would normally consume, especially as starvation loomed closer? The oldest wolf, a grizzled male with a permanent limp from an old injury, watched the fawn with calculating eyes when he thought no one was looking. His loyalty to the alpha remained absolute, but hunger recognized no authority. On the fourth morning, they crested a ridge overlooking a vast valley. The climb had been arduous, especially for the fawn, whose slender legs struggled with the steep, icy terrain. Twice it had slipped, sliding several feet before regaining purchase. Each time, the beta female had been there, steadying it, sometimes even using her body as a barrier to prevent a more dangerous fall. Unlike the barren forest behind them, this new territory showed promise. A frozen river snaked through its center, ice gleaming like polished silver in the morning light. Clusters of pine provided shelter from the biting wind, their green needles a stark contrast to the monochromatic landscape they had left behind. Most importantly, tracks in the snow below indicated the presence of elk. Not many, but enough to offer hope. The distinctive hoofprints were fresh, perhaps from the previous evening, suggesting a small herd had passed through recently. The pack paused at the ridgeline, surveying this potential sanctuary. The alpha stood motionless, his senses cataloging every detail, the direction of the wind, the age of the tracks, the potential hiding places of rival predators. His nostrils flared as he processed the complex tapestry of scents carried on the air. The musk of elk, the sharp tang of pine sap, the mineral smell of the frozen river. And something else. Something that caused his hackles to rise slightly. This valley could be their salvation or their grave, depending on what awaited them below. The decision to proceed would not be made lightly. Too much depended on his judgment. As they began their descent, picking their way carefully down the rocky slope, the fawn stumbled, exhaustion finally overcoming its determination. Its front legs buckled first, then its hindquarters collapsed. It fell to its knees, trembling with fatigue and hunger. A soft, plaintive bleat escaped its throat, the first sound it had made since joining the pack. The beta female stopped beside it, whining softly, nudging it with her muzzle in encouragement. The rest of the pack continued forward several paces before realizing their smallest member had fallen behind. They paused, looking back with a mixture of impatience and concern, their own hunger urging them forward while their newfound connection to the fawn pulled them back. The alpha returned, retracing his steps with purposeful strides. He stood over the fallen fawn, his massive frame casting a shadow across the smaller creature. For a moment, something flickered in his yellow eyes. A calculation, perhaps, or a reconsideration of his inexplicable mercy. The logical part of his brain, the part honed by years of survival in an unforgiving wilderness, recognized that the fawn represented food, sustenance that could keep his pack alive for days. Hunger could override even the strongest convictions, and the pack's survival had always been his primary responsibility. The younger wolves watched intently, reading his body language for any sign that the strange experiment had ended, that nature's normal order would finally reassert itself. The fawn looked up at him, its dark eyes reflecting neither fear nor pleading, but a simple acceptance of whatever would come next. It had survived longer than it should have, protected by creatures designed to kill it. Perhaps this was where the strange journey ended. Its breathing was shallow, each exhale creating a small cloud in the cold air. It made no attempt to rise, no attempt to flee, either from acceptance or simply lack of strength. But instead of baring his teeth, the alpha lowered himself to the ground beside the fawn. He pressed his warm body against the smaller creature, sharing what little heat he could spare. The gesture was deliberate, unmistakable in its meaning. With a soft growl, he called the rest of the pack to him. One by one, they returned, forming a living barrier against the wind. The youngest wolves came first, their curiosity about the fawn still outweighing their hunger. The older members followed more slowly, their loyalty to their leader overcoming their reservations. The message was clear. They would rest here until the fawn recovered its strength. The hunt for food, the exploration of the promising valley below, all would wait. As the sun reached its zenith, casting weak winter light across the valley below, the alpha raised his head suddenly. His ears swiveled forward, focusing on something beyond human hearing. A subtle change in the air, perhaps, or a sound so distant only his finely tuned senses could detect it. The other wolves tensed, following his gaze toward the eastern edge of the valley. Their bodies shifted from relaxed to alert in an instant, muscles coiling in preparation for whatever threat he had identified. There, barely visible against the tree line, stood another wolf pack. Larger, with at least 12 members, their gray forms moved with predatory purpose along the frozen riverbank. Even from this distance, it was clear they were healthier, stronger, their winter coats thick and full, their movements confident and coordinated. They hadn't yet detected the smaller pack on the ridge, but it would be only a matter of time. Their hunting patterns showed they were working their way systematically across the valley floor, tracking the same elk herd that had given the alpha's pack hope. Territory disputes between wolf packs rarely ended without bloodshed. The wilderness operated on simple rules. The strong claimed the best hunting grounds, the weak were driven to the margins. Against a larger, well-fed group, the alpha's depleted pack stood little chance. In their prime, with full strength, they might have held their own through superior tactics and the advantage of familiar territory. But weakened by hunger and travel, they would be overwhelmed quickly. And encumbered by a fawn that could neither fight nor flee effectively, their options were severely limited. The logical choice would be to abandon the valley, to seek hunting grounds elsewhere, perhaps returning when they had regained their strength. The alpha rose slowly to his feet, his decision made. He would not abandon the fawn now, not after coming so far. The choice defied explanation, even to himself. But it was as immutable as the mountains surrounding them. But neither would he lead his pack to certain death in a confrontation they couldn't win. With quiet authority, he guided them into the dense underbrush along the northern ridge, a longer route into the valley, but one that might allow them to avoid detection. His path would take them to the western quadrant, where the rival pack had already hunted and would be less likely to return immediately. As they moved silently through the shadows, the fawn kept pace with renewed determination, as if sensing the heightened danger. Perhaps the brief rest had restored some of its strength, or perhaps it was simply the instinctive response to the pack's increased alertness. The wolves' breath created small clouds in the frigid air, but no sound betrayed their passage. They moved as they had been born to move, like ghosts through the forest, their paws finding secure purchase on even the most treacherous ground. The rival pack continued their hunt below, unaware of the strange family making their way along the periphery of what would soon become contested territory. Occasionally, one of the distant wolves would pause, raising its head as if catching a hint of their scent on the changing wind, but then return to the hunt without alarm. The alpha knew that avoiding confrontation today merely postponed the inevitable. This valley wasn't big enough for two packs, especially in winter when game was concentrated in the limited areas that offered both food and shelter. Sooner or later, blood would stain the snow. And when that day came, the presence of the fawn would become more than an oddity. It would become a liability that could cost them all their lives. The younger wolves might try to protect it instinctively, dividing their attention in a fight where absolute focus would be essential. The beta female, with her growing attachment, might risk herself unnecessarily. Even the alpha himself couldn't be certain how he would react if the fawn were threatened directly. As darkness fell, they found shelter in a shallow cave carved into the valley wall. Generations of water erosion had created this refuge, its entrance partially concealed by a fallen pine that had somehow taken root despite its awkward angle. Inside, the temperature was noticeably warmer than the exposed ridge, the stone walls blocking the worst of the wind. The alpha took position at the entrance, his gaze fixed on the distant campfire-like glow of the rival pack's eyes in the darkness. They had made a kill. The scent of fresh blood carried faintly on the night breeze, both tantalizing and frustrating. Behind him, his family slept in an exhausted heap. The fawn nestled securely in their center. Its small form rose and fell with each breath, occasionally twitching as it dreamed whatever dreams come to creatures so young. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. The rival pack would continue their systematic hunting of the valley. The alpha's pack would need to find food soon, or risk becoming too weak to hunt effectively. The fawn would need more substantial nourishment than bark and moss if it were to survive. And always, there was the question of why. Why this one fawn, out of countless prey they had taken over the years? Why this exception to the unyielding law of predator and prey? The alpha had no answer, even for himself. He only knew that the decision, once made, could not be unmade. For tonight, they were safe. For tonight, the impossible family remained whole. What none of them could know was that the rival pack had already caught their scent. The alpha male had detected it hours ago when the wind shifted briefly. And the mixed aroma of predator and prey moving together had awakened a curiosity that would not be easily satisfied. In their own shelter across the valley, the rival alpha shared silent communication with his beta, their eyes reflecting the same question. What manner of wolf protects what it should kill? Such an aberration required investigation. Such weakness demanded exploitation. As the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the dramas unfolding beneath them, the rival pack began planning their approach. By dawn, they would have a strategy. By nightfall, they would have answers, and possibly a meal unlike any they had experienced before. Morning arrived with a heavy silence. No bird song greeted the dawn, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Only the hollow whisper of wind through bare branches and the occasional creak of ice-laden limbs. The alpha sensed the change immediately upon waking, his consciousness shifting from sleep to full alertness without the gradual transition most creatures experience. His amber eyes opened to the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, instantly assessing his surroundings. His pack stirred around him, their bodies pressed close for warmth. The fawn still nestled at their center. The small creature's breathing remained deep and regular, undisturbed by the tension that had awakened its protector. but something had shifted in the valley overnight. The air itself felt charged with anticipation, carrying scents and subtle signals that told a story to those who could read them. He moved to the cave entrance with silent grace, his massive paws finding purchase on the cold stone without sound. The weak winter sun had just begun to crest the eastern ridge, casting long blue shadows across the snow-covered valley. His senses were alert to every subtle signal. The direction of the wind, the absence of normal morning activity among the forest's smaller inhabitants, the lingering scent markers that hadn't been there the previous evening. The rival pack had been busy through the night. Their scent markers formed a perimeter around the western half of the valley, a clear declaration of territory claimed. The urine and glandular secretions told a complex story to the alpha's sensitive nose. A pack of 12, led by a mature male in his prime, confident enough to claim new hunting grounds, even with an established pack nearby. More concerning were the fresher tracks, no more than an hour old, that circled within 100 yards of the cave. They had been found, their location pinpointed with precision. The question was no longer if confrontation would come, but when, and under what terms. Behind him, the beta female nudged the fawn to its feet. The small creature had regained some strength during the night, its eyes clearer, its movements more coordinated. The few hours of undisturbed rest, combined with the warmth shared by the pack, had done much to restore its vitality, though hunger still hollowed its flanks and dulled its coat. It accepted a gentle grooming from the beta, standing patiently as she cleaned its face with methodical strokes of her tongue, removing the sleep crust from its eyes and the traces of moss from its previous evening's meager meal. The bond between them had solidified into something resembling a mother-child relationship. Unusual, but undeniable. Her movements were tender yet efficient, mirroring exactly how she would have tended to her own cubs had they survived. The rest of the pack watched with varying degrees of acceptance. The older wolves maintained a cautious distance, their hunger still a constant presence that made the fawn's protected status a daily exercise in self-control. The younger ones, more adaptable and perhaps less rigidly bound to instinct, had begun to treat the fawn as a peculiar packmate, occasionally sniffing it curiously or lying nearby during rest periods. The alpha's decision came quickly, formed from years of leadership and the immediate assessment of their situation. They would hunt immediately, taking advantage of the morning hours when the rival pack might be resting after their night's activities of territorial marking and reconnaissance. A successful kill would strengthen his wolves physically and psychologically before the inevitable confrontation. Even a small deer or several hares would improve their condition significantly. He selected 3 of his strongest members to accompany him. The grizzled older male whose experience made him valuable despite his limp, and 2 younger wolves in their physical prime whose speed and stamina would be essential in a successful chase. This would leave the beta female and 2 others to guard the fawn and their temporary shelter, a balanced allocation of their limited resources. As they departed, he caught the beta's eye. A wealth of communication passed between them in that brief glance: caution, loyalty, determination, and a shared understanding of what was at stake. They had been partners for 4 winters, their bond forged through countless hunts, territorial defenses, and the raising of 2 litters. No words were needed between them. The subtlest shift in posture or flick of an ear conveyed paragraphs of meaning. She would defend the fawn with her life if necessary, not just because it was his will, but because the small creature had somehow worked its way into the complex web of pack relationships. He acknowledged this with a subtle tilt of his head before leading his hunting party into the forest, moving away from the areas most heavily marked by the rival pack. They moved like shadows through the trees, their paws finding the quietest path through crusted snow and fallen branches. Years of hunting together had perfected their coordination. No unnecessary communication was needed as they spread out in a loose formation, each wolf attentive to both the environment and the subtle cues from their leader. They followed the promising scent of elk that still lingered from the previous day, a trail that had been partially obscured by the night's light snowfall but remained detectable to their sensitive noses. The scent grew stronger as they approached the eastern section of the valley, where the forest thinned slightly before meeting the frozen river. The trail led them toward a clearing where the river widened into a small lake, its surface a solid sheet of white broken only by a few dark holes where the current ran too swiftly to freeze completely. There, breaking through the ice with their hooves to reach the water below, stood 3 elk, an aging bull with an impressive rack of antlers that spoke of many seasons survived, and 2 females whose more slender forms still carried substantial weight that would feed the pack for days. The wolves paused at the forest's edge, their bodies instantly motionless, becoming part of the landscape rather than intruders upon it. The alpha assessed their prey with calculating eyes, noting every detail that might influence the hunt's strategy. The bull would be too dangerous, his antlers still formidable despite his age, capable of goring a wolf with a single defensive thrust. The risk outweighed the potential reward, especially with their depleted strength. One of the females, however, showed signs of weakness, a slight favoring of her right foreleg, perhaps from an old injury or simply the wear of a harsh winter. She compensated well, but the alpha's experienced eye caught the millisecond delay in her weight transfer, the slightly shortened stride on that side. This would be their target. The alpha signaled his plan with subtle body language, a specific angle of his ears, a particular tension in his shoulders, the positioning of his tail. To human observers, these signals would be nearly imperceptible, but to his hunting companions, they conveyed a detailed strategy. They would separate the injured female from the group, drive her toward the deeper snow at the lake's northern edge, where her disadvantage would become more pronounced. The older male would circle wide to cut off escape back toward the forest, while the 2 younger wolves would flank her, keeping her moving in the desired direction. The alpha himself would make the crucial hamstring attack when the moment was right. The hunt began with patient precision, each wolf taking their assigned position with the coordination that came from years of hunting together. They emerged from the tree line at carefully timed intervals, their appearance calculated to create maximum disorientation among the elk. Back at the cave, the beta female sensed the change before she heard or saw anything. A subtle shift in the air, a momentary hush falling over the forest, the sudden stillness of a chickadee that had been foraging nearby. Her muscles tensed instinctively, her senses heightening to their maximum acuity. She moved to the entrance, her body language immediately communicating alert status to the other guards. They responded instantly, taking up positions that reflected years of defensive experience. The beta positioned herself directly in the cave opening, creating a living barrier between the potential threat and those she protected. The 2 other wolves flanked her slightly to the sides, where they would have room to maneuver if attack came. Their hackles raised, ears forward, tails straight, their bodies communicating readiness without excessive aggression that might provoke an immediate attack. From the trees emerged the rival alpha, a massive black wolf with a scar running from his right eye to his muzzle. Evidence of past battles survived and dominance maintained. His coat was thick and glossy, indicating good health and successful hunting. He approached alone, which was unusual and significant in wolf diplomacy. This was not an attack, but a parley, a reconnaissance that acknowledged the established presence of another pack. Behind him, just within the tree line, waited his pack, at least 10 wolves, their eyes gleaming with predatory interest, their bodies poised for either attack or retreat, depending on how the interaction unfolded. Their disciplined stillness spoke of a well-led, cohesive unit. Dangerous opponents should conflict arise. The beta held her ground, neither advancing nor retreating. Her posture communicated clearly. This territory was claimed, this shelter protected. She allowed a low growl to rumble in her chest, not a direct challenge, but a warning, establishing boundaries without immediate escalation. The rival alpha stopped at a respectful distance, his head held high but his teeth not bared. The posture of strength without immediate aggression. He was taking the measure of this unusual pack, assessing their numbers, condition, and resolve, before committing to either conflict or accommodation. For a long moment, they assessed each other in silence. The only sound the soft sigh of wind through the pines and the occasional distant crack of ice shifting on the frozen river. Then the rival's attention shifted to what lay behind the beta, the fawn, partially visible in the cave's shadows. His head tilted slightly, curiosity momentarily overriding territorial concerns. This was what had drawn him here. Not just the intrusion of another pack, but the mystery of predator protecting prey. The incongruity had been detected in their scent trail. Wolf and deer moving together, not in chase, but in company. Such an aberration demanded investigation, perhaps even more than the territorial incursion itself. The standoff might have remained at this impasse, if not for the fawn itself. Perhaps driven by some inexplicable instinct or simply innocent curiosity, it moved forward, stepping past the beta to stand fully, revealed before the rival alpha. The two guardian wolves whined anxiously, their carefully planned defensive position disrupted by this unexpected movement. They adjusted quickly, shifting to maintain protective proximity to the fawn without directly challenging the rival alpha's position. Their confusion was evident. The instinct to protect the fawn warring with the instinct to prevent it from exposing itself to danger. The rival alpha's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. A momentary widening of the eyes, a slight backward step that lasted no more than a heartbeat before he regained his composed stance. Whatever he had expected, the reality before him seemed to give him pause. The fawn, for its part, showed no fear. It stood with the quiet dignity that had first stayed the alpha's killing strike days ago, its large eyes regarding the rival wolf with something that, in a human, might have been called trust. Its small hooves were planted firmly in the snow, its ears upright and attentive rather than flattened in fear. This was not the behavior of prey before predator, and the anomaly was clearly not lost on the rival alpha, whose head tilted further in evident confusion. Meanwhile, the hunt had reached its critical moment. The injured elk had been successfully separated from her companions, who had fled toward the eastern shore of the lake, leaving her to face the wolves alone. The alpha's strategy had worked perfectly. She was now struggling through deeper snow, her weakened leg causing her to flounder where a healthy elk might still power through. The older male wolf had positioned himself to block any retreat, while the younger wolves darted in and out at her flanks, keeping her moving in the desired direction while avoiding her desperate kicks. The alpha led the final charge, timing his approach to coincide with the moment when she stumbled slightly, her weakened leg momentarily buckling in the deep snow. He launched himself in a powerful leap, aiming for the hamstring that would bring the massive creature down. His jaws closed on flesh and sinew, his weight dragging at the elk's hind leg even as she tried to shake him off. The pain and sudden imbalance caused her to falter further, creating openings for the other wolves. His packmates attacked in concert, one at the throat, one harrying the opposite flank to prevent the elk from regaining her balance. The elk fought valiantly, kicking and thrashing, her survival instinct giving her strength beyond her physical condition. For a moment, it seemed she might break free, as she managed to dislodge the wolf at her flank with a powerful kick that sent him tumbling through the snow. But the alpha maintained his grip on her hamstring, and the momentary focus on the other wolf left her vulnerable to the third attacker, who lunged for her throat. The outcome was inevitable. As she collapsed into the snow, the alpha delivered the killing bite to her throat, ending her struggle with efficiency. That might be called mercy in its swift conclusion. The hunt had succeeded with minimal risk. A clean, efficient kill that would feed his pack for days. As they began to feed, taking in the nourishment they so desperately needed, the alpha allowed himself and his hunting companions first access to the richest parts of the carcass, the liver, heart, and other nutrient-dense organs that would restore their strength most quickly. The meat would be brought back to the cave for the others. But this initial feeding was essential to recover the energy expended in the hunt. The warm blood and fresh meat were a stark contrast to the days of near starvation they had endured. And the wolves fed with the focused intensity of creatures who understand that such bounty is never guaranteed in the wilderness. Their feast was interrupted by a distant howl that cut through the still morning air. The alpha raised his blood-smeared muzzle, instantly alert, his ears swiveling to pinpoint the sound's origin. It was not the beta's voice, but one of the younger wolves left to guard the cave. A call of warning rather than immediate danger. The specific pitch and pattern communicated that there was no attack in progress, but that an unusual situation required the alpha's attention. Something was happening at their shelter, something beyond the normal parameters of territorial defense. With a commanding bark, the alpha ordered 2 of his hunters to remain with the kill. They would continue feeding and then bring as much meat as they could carry back to the cave. He and the third wolf, one of the younger, faster members, raced back through the forest, covering ground with a speed that only urgent purpose can summon. They chose a direct route, abandoning the caution they had used when tracking the elk. The alpha's mind raced with possibilities. Had the rival pack launched an attack despite the diplomatic approach of their leader? Had some other predator, perhaps a mountain lion or bear, been drawn to their shelter? Or was it something to do with the fawn itself, whose presence continued to disrupt the normal patterns of wilderness life? They arrived to find a scene of tense diplomacy rather than combat. The rival alpha still stood before the cave, now accompanied by his beta, a gray female nearly as large as he was, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. The fawn remained in the open, while the beta female and the other guards maintained their protective formation around it. No blood had been shed, but the air thrummed with potential violence. The scent of tension, a combination of stress pheromones, heightened adrenaline, and the subtle musk of dominance display, hung heavy in the small clearing before the cave. The alpha's arrival shifted the dynamic immediately. He approached at a measured pace, neither rushing aggressively nor showing hesitation that might be interpreted as weakness. He moved to stand beside his beta, their shoulders nearly touching in a display of unified leadership. Both rival leaders now faced each other directly, the traditional confrontation of competing packs. What was unusual, unprecedented even, was the presence of the fawn between them, a bizarre focal point in this territorial dispute. In normal circumstances, such prey would have been killed instantly by either pack. Its continued existence and apparent protection by the alpha's pack represented a deviation from natural law so profound that it demanded explanation. The rival alpha broke the silence with a low growl, then a series of subtle vocalizations and body movements. A lift of the chin, a specific angle of the ears, a particular pattern of weight shifting from paw to paw. The language of wolves is complex and nuanced, communicating not just aggression or submission, but questions, proposals, boundaries. To human observers, much of this communication would be invisible, lost in what appeared to be simple animal posturing. But to the wolves involved, it was as clear as spoken language. His message became clear through this primal dialogue. He was not challenging for the territory itself, at least not immediately. His interest lay in the fawn, in understanding why another alpha would protect what should be prey, why this fundamental law of nature had been breached. There was both curiosity and wariness in his communication, the instinctive caution toward anything that defies natural order. The alpha's response was equally complex. He positioned himself beside the fawn, his body language clearly associating the small creature with his pack. He performed a brief scent-marking gesture, rubbing his muzzle against the fawn's flank, reinforcing the message that this was not prey, but pack, at least in his determination. The message was unambiguous. The fawn was under his protection, and any threat to it would be met with the full force of his authority. Yet there was no direct aggression in his display, no immediate challenge for the valley itself. The subtext was clear to the rival alpha. This unusual situation need not lead to immediate conflict if certain boundaries were respected. What followed was a negotiation unlike any in wolf memory. Through subtle movements, vocalizations, and demonstrations of both strength and restraint, the two alphas established an unusual arrangement. The valley would be shared, the eastern half belonging to the rival pack, the western half to the alpha's family. The river would serve as neutral territory for drinking, and most importantly, the fawn would remain under the alpha's protection, its unusual status acknowledged, if not understood, by the rival pack. This last point seemed to fascinate the rival alpha, whose curiosity about the aberration appeared to outweigh his predatory instincts, at least temporarily. The negotiation included several demonstrations of dominance and counter-dominance. Moments when one alpha would advance slightly, only to be met with an equal show of resolve from the other. At one point, the rival alpha approached the fawn directly, perhaps testing the limits of this strange protection. The alpha's response was immediate and unequivocal, a warning growl that started low but rose in volume and intensity, his body coiling with potential energy that promised violence if the approach continued. The rival alpha backed off, but with a deliberate slowness that preserved his dignity. This was not submission, but acknowledgement. Recognition of a boundary without conceding overall dominance. As the rival alpha and his beta retreated to the tree line, where their pack awaited, a new understanding hung in the air. This was not peace. Wolves rarely achieve true peace with competing packs. But it was a truce born of mutual curiosity and respect, a temporary accommodation that might last days or months, depending on how circumstances evolved. The rival's final glance back held something that might almost be described as admiration. Had such concepts any meaning in the brutal calculus of wilderness survival? Perhaps it was simply recognition of an alpha strong enough, confident enough in his leadership, to defy even the fundamental laws of predator and prey. The alpha watched them disappear into the forest before turning to his own pack. The two wolves he'd left with the elk carcass would be bringing meat back to the cave soon. They would feast tonight, regaining strength after days of near starvation. The successful hunt combined with the diplomatic resolution of the territorial dispute represented a significant victory, one that would reinforce his leadership position within the pack. The fawn would not share in this meal, of course. But the alpha had noticed patches of winter grass exposed near the river. Suitable forage that might sustain the small creature until spring brought more abundant vegetation. He made a mental note to guide the fawn there after the immediate situation was fully resolved. The beta female approached him, her posture communicating both relief at his return and pride in his handling of the confrontation. She nuzzled briefly against his shoulder, a rare display of affection that spoke to the stress of the situation and her gratitude for its resolution. The other wolves relaxed visibly, the tension of potential conflict draining from their bodies. The fawn, seemingly oblivious to how close it had come to becoming a casualty of pack politics, began to explore the area immediately outside the cave, nibbling experimentally at the bark of a young aspen. As darkness fell once more, the pack settled into their shelter with full bellies for the first time in weeks. The returning hunters had brought substantial portions of the elk carcass back to the cave, and all had fed well, even the oldest members who sometimes went hungry when food was scarce. The alpha had ensured the beta female received choice portions, recognizing her role in protecting the fawn during his absence. The cave now smelled of contentment, the musky scent of well-fed wolves mixed with the earthy odor of the cave itself, and the sweet, hay-like smell of the fawn. They arranged themselves in their usual sleeping formation, with the strongest members nearest the entrance and the most vulnerable at the center. The fawn lay between the alpha and beta, occasionally nuzzling against them as it drifted toward sleep. Outside, a light snow began to fall, covering the day's tracks and softening the harsh landscape. The alpha remained watchful at the cave entrance, his powerful body silhouetted against the night sky. His thoughts, if wolves can be said to have thoughts in the human sense, were inscrutable. The truce with the rival pack had bought them time, but winter was far from over. The valley offered better prospects than their previous territory, but would still require careful management to sustain two packs until spring. The fawn was growing stronger each day, but remained vulnerable to countless threats beyond wolf attacks. The cold itself, predators like mountain lions that recognized no truces, the simple scarcity of appropriate food in winter's grip, and his own decision to protect rather than consume continued to defy rational explanation. There was no evolutionary advantage to it, no clear benefit to his pack's survival. Yet something deeper than reason, more fundamental than instinct, had guided this choice and continued to affirm it. Yet as he watched his pack sleeping peacefully, the fawn nestled securely among them, he felt no regret. Something profound had shifted in the natural order, some boundary crossed that could not be uncrossed. Whatever came next, whether tragedy or triumph, they would face it together, this impossible family forged in the crucible of winter's deepest cold. In the distant trees, the eyes of the rival pack occasionally reflected moonlight as they maintained their watch. Their alpha had honored the truce, but curiosity still drew them to observe this unprecedented phenomenon. What they could not know, what even the alpha himself did not fully comprehend, was that this small disruption in nature's pattern would ripple outward in ways that would eventually transform the valley and all who dwelled within it. For in nature, even the smallest deviation can, over time, create profound change. A butterfly's wings eventually becoming a storm, a single act of mercy eventually becoming a new way of being. For now, though, there was only the quiet of falling snow, the rhythmic breathing of sleeping wolves, and the small miracle of predator and prey sharing warmth in the heart of winter's domain. The alpha's vigilance gradually relaxed as the night deepened and no threats emerged from the darkness. Eventually, he too settled beside his unusual family, his massive body providing both protection and warmth to those around him. His last conscious awareness before sleep claimed him was the gentle pressure of the fawn's small body against his flank, its heartbeat a quick counterpoint to his own slower rhythm. In that moment of transition between wakefulness and dreams, a thought-like sensation passed through him. Not in words, for wolves have none, but in feeling. This was right. This was as it should be. This was pack. And so the night passed in peace, while the snow continued to fall, erasing the boundaries between territories, between species, between what was and what might be. 2 weeks passed in the shared valley, each day establishing new patterns and rituals for the unusual family. The truce with the rival pack held, though not without occasional tensions when hunting territories overlapped or when curiosity about the fawn led the rival wolves too close to the alpha's cave. These incidents were resolved through displays of dominance rather than violence. A system of boundaries constantly negotiated through body language, vocalizations, and scent markers. The weather had begun to shift subtly. Though winter still maintained its grip on the landscape, the midday sun now carried enough warmth to melt the surface snow in exposed areas, creating patches of muddy earth that refroze each night. These daily cycles of thaw and freeze formed a crusty layer atop the snowpack, making travel more difficult for the heavier wolves, but providing unexpected advantage to the fawn, whose lighter weight allowed it to walk atop the frozen crust while its protectors broke through. The fawn had grown noticeably during their time in the valley. Regular access to winter forage along the riverbanks had filled out its frame, replacing the gaunt starvation of their first meeting with the lean healthiness appropriate to a young deer in winter. Its coat had regained its luster, and its eyes shone with increasing vitality. Most remarkably, it had developed specific behaviors for communicating with the pack. A stamping of hooves to indicate alarm, a particular bleat that seemed reserved for the beta female, a way of touching its nose to the alpha's muzzle that somehow conveyed both gratitude and trust. The pack had adapted to the fawn's presence with varying degrees of acceptance. The beta female had fully embraced her role as surrogate mother, spending hours each day grooming the fawn, guiding it to food sources, and teaching it to recognize potential dangers. The younger wolves treated it as a peculiar packmate, occasionally including it in their play. Though they had learned to moderate their roughness after the alpha's sharp reprimand when early games had frightened the small creature, the older members maintained a cautious distance, their instincts still at odds with the alpha's decree, but their loyalty to him outweighing their predatory impulses. On this particular morning, the alpha led a small group including the fawn and beta female toward the river. The night's hard freeze had created ideal conditions for crossing to the eastern bank, where new vegetation had been spotted emerging from beneath the snow. Tender shoots that would provide perfect nourishment for the growing fawn. The river's surface gleamed like polished stone in the morning light, solid enough to support their weight, but requiring careful navigation around areas where faster currents prevented complete freezing. They were halfway across when the alpha detected movement on the opposite shore. The rival pack's beta female emerged from the tree line, accompanied by 3 younger wolves. They paused at the river's edge, clearly surprised to encounter the alpha's group in this neutral territory. For a moment, tension crackled in the air between them. The alpha positioned himself between his family and the potential threat, his posture communicating readiness without immediate aggression. What happened next defied the expected patterns of wolf behavior. Rather than retreating or displaying dominance, the rival beta seemed to make a decision. She approached the river's edge alone, leaving her companions at the tree line. Her body language communicated neither challenge nor submission, but something rarer: curiosity. She sat at the bank, watching the fawn with evident interest. After a moment's hesitation, the alpha's beta female moved forward to stand beside him, the fawn between them. For several minutes, the two groups observed each other across the partially frozen river. Then, in a gesture that surprised even the alpha, the rival beta lowered her head and pawed at the ice before her, breaking off a small chunk and pushing it forward with her nose. It skittered across the frozen surface, coming to rest near the fawn. The small deer approached cautiously, sniffing at the offered object. Embedded in the ice was a sprig of early spring growth, a tender shoot that had been trapped by the overnight freeze. The message was unmistakable, even across species boundaries, an offering, a recognition, perhaps even an overture toward something beyond mere tolerance. The alpha watched as the fawn delicately licked the ice until the green shoot was freed, then consumed it with evident pleasure. When it finished, it looked toward the rival beta and executed a small hop that had become its expression of contentment. A boundary had been crossed, though its significance remained to be determined. The rival beta retreated to her waiting companions, and they disappeared into the forest without further interaction. The alpha's group continued their crossing, reaching the eastern bank without incident. As they foraged among the newly discovered vegetation, the alpha remained thoughtful, sensing that the valley's unusual dynamics were evolving in ways that even he, with all his leadership experience, could not predict. That evening, as twilight painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of lavender and gold, the alpha stood at the entrance of their cave, surveying his domain. The fawn grazed nearby, its small form silhouetted against the sunset. The beta female rested a few yards away, her vigilant eyes never straying far from her adopted charge. The rest of the pack had settled into their evening routines, some still hunting, others grooming themselves or dozing after the day's activities. From his vantage point, the alpha could see the rival pack's territory across the river. Their activities mirrored his own family's, hunting, resting, maintaining the social bonds that kept them functioning as a unit. Yet something had changed in the way the two packs regarded each other. The rigid boundaries of territorial division had begun to soften, replaced by a wary but genuine curiosity. The fawn, with its impossible position between predator and prey, had become a focal point for this transformation. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the clear night sky, the alpha was joined by the beta female. She pressed against his side briefly, a gesture of affection and solidarity that had become more frequent in recent days. Together they watched as the fawn completed its evening grazing and approached the cave, ready for the night's rest. Its integration into their family was now so complete that it seemed to have always been there. Its presence as natural as the moon rising above the valley. That night, as the pack slept in their customary formation, the alpha remained awake longer than usual. His keen senses detected subtle changes in the air. The slightly different scent carried by the evening breeze, the distant sound of ice cracking on the river as temperatures shifted. Spring was coming, bringing with it new challenges and possibilities. The fawn would continue to grow, eventually becoming too large to share their shelter. The rival pack's curiosity might evolve into something more complex than mere tolerance. And the alpha's own unprecedented decision to protect rather than hunt would face new tests as the seasons changed. Yet as he finally drifted toward sleep, the fawn's warm body pressed trustingly against his side. He felt a certainty that transcended rational thought. This strange new path, however it had begun, was now theirs to follow together. Whatever came next, whether harmony or conflict, triumph or tragedy, they would face it as they had faced the winter, as an impossible family bound by something stronger than nature's ordinary laws. In the darkness, the fawn dreamed deer dreams of spring meadows and flowing water, while the wolves dreamed wolf dreams of successful hunts and territorial dominance. But in the space between them, where their sleeping bodies touched and shared warmth, perhaps something new was being dreamed into existence. A different way of being in the world, where the boundaries between hunter and hunted might be reimagined, and mercy might become as natural as breath itself. High above the valley, the moon cast its silver light on predator and prey alike, indifferent to the small miracle unfolding beneath its gaze. The first thaw had begun, not just of winter's ice, but of ancient divisions etched into the very DNA of the forest's inhabitants. What would grow from this unexpected melting remained to be seen. But the seeds of change had been planted in the frozen ground of tradition, waiting for spring's full arrival to reveal their true nature.